Go for it.
James, thank you very much for doing this.
Pleasure.
I guess over the next year, this video will get roughly 100 views. So
Woohoo.
we are not YouTube titans, but opera tends to be a pretty niche subject.
That's all right.
And then just to fill people in, how do we know each other? I contacted you a few years ago for some coaching.
Yes.
I think was the
Through the Wagner Society and master singers and the good people that work for them. And when I was not given a break because I'd already had a decent career beforehand, but when I was changing repertoire into the heavy stuff, they gave me opportunities and free coaching and this kind of thing, and now I've sat on a competition a couple of times, and we did a master class after one, didn't we? Yeah, that kind of thing. So it's, and maybe we'll talk about this later, but it's not a question of giving back. I had a big discussion with someone the other day about how the notion of this opera singing and Wagner thing, it's not normal, it's not a natural thing. You know, naturally we don't sing like that. But we now have 100 years of recorded tradition of this, passed down from people who, if they didn't work with Wagner, knew the people that did, and this kind of, and there has to be this handing down of the baton in the Olympic analogy. Because it's not normal. The fashion, particularly with Gen Z, is to open it and say, I don't need any other influence. I just want to, you know, I will take it all from the music, and that's fine, but why ignore 100 years of recordings, writings that have been, you know, Wagner was one of the most written about people in history.
Yeah. And if you have the opportunity to stand on the shoulders of giants and learn from them, why would you not take that opportunity?
Yeah, and meet them.
Yeah.
And this kind of thing, you know, I watched two of your things, Anne and Sir John Tom, and you know, I know them, I've met them, I've spoken to them, and they before them had met the people before them, and I think there is a huge amount of that in opera that we don't talk about. Maybe because directors are coming in and doing whatever the hell they want whilst ignoring whatever's gone before, which is fine. I don't have any choice on that. But just the notion of what we do, it isn't normal to sing over a 100-piece orchestra in a 2,000 plus seat thing. There's a way of doing it. Some people are blessed, some of us have to learn it. And I'm the latter.
You're the latter?
Oh, latter, okay. Yeah. I mean, of course I always sung, and there's the standard thing that my mother said, that I sang before I spoke and all that kind of thing. I always sang, but as you know from being a boy chorister, you know, that ain't the same as singing Wagner. And the number of, even when we were at music college, the number of kids that came down from Oxford and Cambridge, people who finished Oxford and Cambridge, and basically had to relearn how to sing opera or whatever it was, even concert rep, because that notion of blending, when suddenly you're a soloist, you don't want to blend. You need to stand out from that orchestra or spin the sound or whatever without, you know, I had guys that came down from Cambridge, so it's showing my age. You know, there's rave culture thing, and at the end of the raves they used to play this sort of Gregorian chant or this kind of thing, and there was a real market for it, of these choirs singing things like Barber's Agnus Dei and then the classic story of the poor soprano who had too much vibrato and had to stick a handkerchief in her mouth and stand in the corner and all that kind of thing. And so there were kids coming from that at Oxford and Cambridge. Oh, it's probably total myth, but I like it. Would come down to college and realise, oh, that's not how we sing anymore.
That is two very different things.
Yeah.
But it is perfectly possible to make the switch.
Of course, and some of our, who was I talking about the other day, was Simon Kingside, is, you know, good Cambridge man, and has had a world-class opera career that generated a knighthood and still going, you know.
Yeah.
So, you know, those types, Jerry Fenley, another one. Still going in their 60s, so they must have had some sort of technical,
absolutely,
you know, maturity.
Were you a choir scholar yourself?
No.
Okay.
I, age 15, 16, I auditioned for a thing called the National Youth Music Theatre, who were doing a joint thing with the Royal Opera House. And basically, I didn't leave school, but I stopped school, went down to the West End for a couple of months and did this thing with other people who then, we were most sort of 16 to 18, 19-year-olds, and filmed it and this kind of thing. There was a young actor called Jude Law, wasn't it? No idea what happened to him. But I've just found out Idris Elba also did NYT as well. That was a real lesson. I didn't like my time as a cathedral chorister. I didn't really want to go back into
Where were
choirs.
you?
Norwich.
Okay.
That was me. There were plenty of other people who were there that did love it, so maybe it was just me.
Your dad was the organist, wasn't he?
No, not me. No. He was ordained, but nothing to do with the cathedral.
Okay.
We did live in the cathedral close though. I don't know. I was that personality who didn't get on well, and I always balked against authority. Did for my entire. I was at school from 3 to 27.
It doesn't show it all.
So yeah, thank you. No, I can't. I have so many stories about me and authority figures, particularly in the opera world, but maybe we'll save those for another day.
Well, it clearly is not affecting your career, because I've always known you as being very busy, and I wouldn't have contacted you if, you go after the busy ones because you know that they're good, right? Like the people I've got coaching.
You would
from.
think that was the theory.
Yeah.
So I had a dear colleague yesterday message me and say, why the hell are they singing? Who are they? They're rubbish. What are they doing? I've just saw this person in the proms. They were awful. And how are they singing there? And you just think, yeah, okay. Because as we know, there are just far too many singers, not enough work, especially in this country. Of course, now there are so many different rules of quite rightly, diversity and all this kind of thing, which is really important. But it means that, it just makes it harder for other circumstances.
I mean, it is an oversaturated market. A lot of people come here to train because the training's very good, and then you stay here. But it does make it hard to get work. Yeah. And the work is kind of seems to be slimming down as the years go by.
Well, I fear, and I'm ashamed to put this on tape, but the national companies are in big trouble in our country. We will always have these summer festivals because people like picnics, and it's nice to dress up and this kind of thing, and obviously people do like going to the opera as well, but a lot of it is that. I have no problem with that.
But opera also has been that from the beginning. It was always a social affair as well.
Yes, but then there was enough state funding to balance out, like watching Anne Evans talking about her time at E&O, and you just think, and even when I left college in opera studio in 99, I think E&O were probably still doing 15 to 20 operas a season. They still had an ensemble just about, they just were about to start a young artist program. I mean, presumably they'll be down to 5 or 6 now, and half of those not in London. So whatever's going to happen, we've no idea. I haven't worked there in 21 years, so yeah, that's quite a long time to work in your home house.
But you do go abroad a lot. What? It sounds like when we've been texting and emailing trying to fix a date for this, you've been very busy. What have you been up to recently?
Funny enough, I've probably just had the worst year apart from COVID in 25 years.
Oh, really?
Yeah, which involved moving agencies and changing things, and the Wagner was, for me, has been the slowest to pick up again. I think, I've seen people doing the smaller stuff, and opera houses, for example, my signature role is Hans Sachs. I believe this last season there were only 4 or 5 productions in the world, yet probably 400 Traviatas. So my next role is Traviata, even though it's not necessarily what I do. I can do it, I enjoy doing it, but that's where most of my decisions have always been slightly outweighed business-wise than artistic. The reason I went into saw a thing in Wagner that I'd already done a few of what they call the smaller roles, stood next to quite a few Wotans and did go, yeah, I want to do that. Knew it would take some time, which it did, because you have to learn the stuff. Although that doesn't seem to be so relevant now, people are just go for it. Oh, right, okay. No, I spent quite a few years learning how to do it, and then you spend another decade building on that. And yeah, I mean, if there are only 4 or 5 productions of your signature role in the world, and each company says, oh, we must have a new Hans Sachs, because that's what they all want. And of course, the reality is, if you're good enough to sing it, you're probably too busy to learn it. Yeah. I was fortunate that because that was my first, obviously it's the biggest role, but it was my first big role. I was only singing concerts and stuff I'd stopped singing Mozart and Handel, mostly because people weren't booking me. And I realised that, and with a new agent said, yes, I think you should sing the heavy stuff. It will take a few years, which it did. And of course I sang one performance of Meister Singer and my entire career changed after 10 years. Was offered Vienna, 9 months later was singing it in Bayreuth, and I kind of want to sing. I still sang just as well the day before, but okay, if that's what you think. And you have to prove yourself.
Yeah.
And I was very fortunate that a group of people, or for the 4 or 5 guys that used to do it, were retiring or stopping, and the next people, people like Bryn Turf or Jerry Finlay, Michael Foller, hadn't done it yet.
Okay.
And so when I went to Bayreuth and I spoke to Katharina Wagner and Eva Wagner, and I said, well, how come I got the job? I started to audition, obviously, but she said, oh, we drew up a list. And I went, oh, right. And I said, and who else was it? Oh, just one person. And apparently they had a list of one, and it was me. I'm sure they would have found somebody else, but
who were the list of 4 or 5 who were retiring?
So the guy I took over from was Alan Titus, a very fine American singer who'd done Katerina's production the year before, and obviously, a few months before. Rumours were that he hated it so much he just said, "That's it, I quit." I don't think it was that. I think he was of an age where one retires. Robert Hall had done it before him, very fine. Jan Hendrik Rutering did it at Covent Garden when I did the small role. So there's these kind of guys that were getting to a certain age and very fine singers, but obviously they'd already done it there or they didn't. And to be frank, there were also people that didn't want to do production because it was so crazy. In the end, I kind of thought it was a bit Stockholm syndrome that if you were in it, you ended up loving it. Just as we often do with crazy productions. So
and then you go and do a more traditional production. You're like, this is...
I then did Otto Schenk in Vienna. So, and that, literally the first performance I did in Graz of Meister Singer, the boss of the Wiener Staatsoper came up to me and said, yeah, you're going to do this in my house. Called it my house. Okay, he said, if it's Herr Thielemann, you will have to audition. If it's anyone else, it's yours. And I went, oh, right, okay, thank you. And so I did that.
So before that happened, and that was your major Wagner break,
yeah,
was there a competition that led you to being considered for Wagner roles?
Yes.
What was that?
So it was the first edition of the Seattle Opera Wagner. There was probably an international in there somewhere, competition. And Seattle was renowned as the Wagner place in America.
Okay.
And the boss of the company, Spake Jenkins, who was there for years and years, and they were famous for their ring. Even my old teacher had gone out there, and they would sing it in English one week and German the next in the 1970s.
Okay.
And all the great E&O singers went over and did that, because of course in the 70s the E&O ring was huge, and names that you'll know all went over. And my old teacher did that as well.
Who was
Margaret Kingsley,
yes.
who is still with us, and she was wonderful. In fact, the year I did the Ferrier final, I think more than half the students were the competition people were her finalists.
I didn't realise. So she was teaching at the RCM when I was there as well.
Yeah.
And you don't realise the mammoth careers these people have had.
Yeah.
Because you just go and you think, oh, they're just a bunch of teachers.
Yeah.
But she sang.
Well, some did. She sang, I think, Brunhilde to Hans Hotter's last Wotan. Okay. She was probably only sort of 29. I think she was unfortunate. She was exactly the same generation as Gwyneth Jones. Okay. So it was probably, and Gwyneth, I believe, left college, did a Decca debut album, and poof. Yeah. And Margaret then retrained in her 30s as a mezzo because she had such a natural technique, and then, as you know from your previous things, how the hormones and everything changed, presumably, some reason the voice, she had to retrain, and she retrained as a mezzo, which just meant that she understood voice, because she'd had to put together her own one and have another career. Mm-hmm. After, singing Brunhilde in her late 20s, early 30s, because, she could just ping it out. Then, essentially, her husband got sick in his 50s, and she said, right, I'll quit singing and I'll just teach. And she was everyone, I was her second ever man, Gianni Vittor, women, and a guy called Simon Kirkbride went to her. And then I was her second, and then a guy called Thomas Thomason was her third, and he still has a very fine career around the world. So, and then of course it was tenors, baritones, everything going to that, because when you have half the finalists of the main competition, everyone, you know what it's like, everyone goes for them.
Yeah.
But who were you with at college?
I started with I started with Henry Herford, because he'd been my teacher at school.
Yeah.
And then I changed, because Henry, he wasn't really that much into the opera repertoire.
No.
He did a
No,
lot
I have
of
some lovely discs of him, you know, singing songs and oratorio and stuff. Yeah.
I spent most of my time there with a chap called Peter Savage.
I know Peter very well.
Yeah.
He was my Don Giovanni when I was Leporello in Scottish opera.
Yeah, who I thought was an excellent teacher. He definitely wouldn't do anyone any damage.
No.
You know, it was just the basics.
Yeah.
And you work with those, and that will keep you on the straight and narrow.
Yeah.
And if you keep it healthy, it will develop over the years as it's meant to develop.
Yeah. And he was a very smart man who had a very solid career that you can look at and go over many years. You know, he was
I think
at least late 50s when he was doing this Don Giovanni, if not 60.
I think he's only just stopped.
That wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah. And I think that was only because of COVID.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
So,
no, a good man. I have a lot of respect for him. From, you know, when we work together.
This thing keeps coming on, and I can't.
That's allowed. It's a church.
I know. It's the first time.
How much does a Grecian earn and all that?
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry,
so when you were in the first 10 years of your career, you were becoming quite well known for Mozart.
Yeah.
What roles?
In 2.5 years, I sang 65 performances of Figaro.
In 2.5 years?
Yeah, and that was pretty much my only role. I think I squeezed the Kultner in My Singer of Covent Garden in between there. But that was almost all the national companies in the UK, because you could start, in those days, you could start working in this country. Finished up age 30 singing in the Bastille with, and I think I had a different count every night, and there was people like Worodowski, Scovus, Peter Mattei, Jerry Finley, who'd done Figaro early in the run, came back and did the count. So that was just sponge, learning from all these guys that knew what they were doing. And it was there was this 1970s Strehler production that was very famous in Paris. And I think this was the last thing of it. Famously, Susanna's cap had all the names of the people that had sung the role, starting with Mirella Freni and working through. Jose Van Damme created the role, so it was
probably my favourite singer.
Yeah, I mean that's class. So that was nice. At 30 years old, singing in in the biggest one of the biggest houses in Europe. And then it kind of, I think I did one more production of Figaro, and then nothing. And then I left an agent and moved to another one. We discussed this. I did my first Johanna, which of course is heavy, but it's only like 25 minutes singing. And then I'd done Donna and Kultner and Herulfer in the Wagner, smallish roles, but and thought maybe that's what I should be doing. You know, I'm a big guy. Obviously, I wasn't as big as I am now, but still a big guy with this I don't want to sound arrogant, but slightly pretty warm voice. I'm not a shouter. I'm not a Bayreuth Bach, as you know.
Well, it's noticeable.
It's about the beauty of the voice, and yes, you need volume where required. And the singers that I listened to, that's what I thought they had, this beauty of voice, but it's warmth, none of this stuff, which is fine if you're singing Albrecht or Tellerrand or whatever. I really have, tip my hat to the people that can do that, because I can't. But this warm, noble sound, which thus Sachs. I was 38 singing Sachs in Bayreuth, the youngest person probably since the war. And I never burned out. Yes, of course I probably do it better now, and there are people that do it better than me. But just getting through a role like that, and much more famous singers than me, I have seen crash and burn singing that live.
Okay.
So
it's such a huge role.
Yeah, I mean it's
massive.
I've spoken to the guy who I thought had done it more times than me, who's just done it in Vienna and Bayreuth, and you know that.
Who's that?
Michael Foller, and he excuse me, I said, I've just done it 50 times. He said, I haven't done it that many times. So I know that I have done it more than any other person active.
Right.
And because you know that there isn't somewhere in a tiny German town that does it every 6 months, because it doesn't happen, it just doesn't. And no, there's Klaus who sings it, who's done it 150 times. No, there isn't. But of course, firstly, my newish agent, when I hate social media, but I am obliged to put stuff on occasionally. And I said, this is my 50th Meister Singer tonight, and put some pictures of me doing it in various places.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, oh, I wish you hadn't done that, because, you know, but I don't want everyone to know that you've done it that many times, because, you know, everyone wants new and fresh, and, you know, here we are in our Grindr, Tinder world, where let's get a new one, you know. And I went, oh, great, okay. Because experience, wisdom, hey, that, who needs that?
Exactly.
You know, in a role that it takes 2.5 hours just to sing my part. You know, who needs someone that actually knows it and can get through it?
Yeah,
that's not important.
Years of experience.
Yeah, exactly. I know. I first sang it in 2009. First did it with the Wagner Society in about 06, 07, doing each chunk of it.
Yeah.
You know, that's a long time, you know, whatever that is, 15, 16 years.
Yeah.
And it's one of those where, yeah, I'm just starting to get to grips with it now.
Yeah.
And of course, I'm a different person than I was in my 30s.
Yeah, but the thing is you have to get that many hundreds, thousands of hours behind you to get to that point, don't you?
Yeah.
But that's a real disadvantage for people nowadays, is that if the work is not there, how are you meant to progress? How are you meant to get better and better?
I mean, obviously you can spend time in the studio and just bash it and bash it and bash it, but there is nothing like stage experience. And you know what I say to every person that's under the age of 40 that I speak to about this, I said, is there a chance you can move to Germany and get a fest? Because that's where the work is. It's the only place that you can't stay here. I mean, you can, but and there are these lovely little companies here that do really honest stuff that's far too good quality for the amount that they pay. But it's if you want, say, I was speaking to a bass recently, and I said, look, if you went to this house, they would probably give, you know, over 2 years, you would probably do every Wagner bass part. Mm. So in Leipzig, in 22, they did all 13 Wagner operas in 3 weeks. I doubt we've done 13 Wagner operas in a decade in this country. I certainly know that E&O and Covent Garden often don't have a Wagner opera in their schedule in over a year. You know, maybe every other year they'll chuck in Lohengrin because that's cheaper.
Okay.
Not necessarily, because of course there are, and E&O tried to do a Ring that was then aborted, and all those kind of things.
Is it not finishing?
Well, yeah, because New York don't want it. So if the Yanks don't want to buy it, then you can't carry on.
Right. Okay.
And yeah, I don't know the machinations of why that is.
Okay. That leads me on to another topic, which I think is really important, and I don't see how people get on without this, is that having some kind of mentor, you know, to actually, because it's like a fast track, and I think this goes for any industry. Were there any people who, I mean, other than Margaret, who obviously was very influential on you, was there anyone else who,
of course,
who were people for you?
Never one specific mentor. As I said, each time, I was very fortunate. I worked with some really good people at the start of my career. Because I did quite well. I had a big break doing British Youth Opera as full staff. Mm-hmm. Then did this Wigmore Hall song competition. So obviously totally different. Got to the final of that, the first British person to get to the final. Then the BBC offered me Young New Generations. So I did that for 2 years. So I was on the radio all the time, learning hundreds of songs. And so therefore you start, you know, so literally, you know, Covent Garden debut was in Meister Singer. It's not normally that. You're normally third guy on the left doing, you know, in Courtner, as much as it's not a big role in that piece, it's probably larger than a lot of Mozart roles. So you get noticed. I got good reviews in the days when there were proper reviewers like Rodney Milnes and these guys that knew the business, not people that are just writing on blogs. Let me just give you an example. So a colleague of mine has just done a ring cycle in Austria in a big festival, and he shared a review, which was lovely for him. He's a great singer. And at the end, he said, it reminded me of Friedrich Shaw and Hans Hotter. He maybe didn't have the size of their voice, but he really communicated all this kind of thing. I thought, right, Friedrich Shaw retired in 1943. So in other words, all they're going on is a recording they've got from the 1930s going... How can you tell what someone's voice was like? I mean, for pity's sake. Even Hotter retired Wotan in the year of my birth, which is a long time ago. And that's what we're talking, you know. It's just, oh, I've got recordings of these people. I'll write their names down. And it's just, yeah. And even the next one he shared as well, you know, which is great. I love it. Compared him to McIntyre. And, you know, Don, yes, he did a few Loughborough things, but he basically stopped in the early 80s. You know, which is 40 years, he stopped singing Wotan really properly. And around then, that's 40 years ago. Or, you know, 35 years ago, he probably stopped singing it. Now, how old do these people have to be to... All they're going on is obviously what their recordings are. And they're all fake. Recordings are fake. Even if it says it's live, they're fake. You know, I'm really going on a tangent now. I did a Handel recording towards the beginning of my career. And I remember seeing a guy from Guildhall who's now doing really well, he's in Bayreuth at the moment, called Derek Welton.
Oh yeah.
Who, they were doing this for Ronaldo. And I spoke to him, he said, oh, I've got to sing this aria that you're doing in Ronaldo. And it's like 40 seconds, how did he sing? And I just went, snip, cut. You know, yeah, they just, they didn't want me to breathe in it, so they took two different cuts, put it together. I didn't have any choice over that. So I sound like some demigod being able to sing these runs for 45 seconds, and it's not me at all. But I sang them, but not all in one go.
You do hear people with these, it sounds like they've got the most phenomenal breath control.
Yeah.
And then actually, you realise that Hovnastovsky does have breath control.
Yeah, and he can, and I'm sure, you know, they turned up the mic a bit, just so, because you can rein it back. And yes, he did have great breath control. And it's not actually that hard. Like, you know, if you do it sensibly, you can, or the, you know, the famous Don Carlo thing, which is fine. You know, it's like it's a gymnastic event, but you know, I don't see singing always like that.
Right.
Sorry, what was the original question? Mentor. Yeah. So, well, I'll give you just some names. So, I was sat in Deutsche Oper Berlin a few years ago watching a Don Giovanni. And I hate to say it, and I'm sorry if they're watching this, but they won't be. The guys singing just didn't really know how to sing Mozart, but they had to do lots of exercises in every press-ups, sit-ups, running, doing this, you know, they were all six-packed up, clothes off, this kind of thing. But they didn't know how to phrase a Mozart phrase, really. Good singers hadn't really learned how to do that. And I sat there thinking, well, my first sort of 3 classes on Mozart were with Tom Allen.
Okay.
Master classes at college, and you know, I learned quite a lot from him, although he always played to the crowd, but I still picked up stuff. And I did his sampling thing and this kind of thing, so I learned that. My first conductors of Mozart were Colin Davis and Charles McCarris, who, you know, it was in their blood. And I thought, as I sat in this theatre, well, no wonder they can't sing a Mozart line and I can. The irony is I stopped singing Mozart at 33. Should still be doing it now. But it's not the done thing, you know, younger, skinnier, prettier, blah, blah, blah.
If offered to you, would
yeah.
you?
Well, I'd like to do the baritone ones now, the proper, whereas I was always a bass baritone, so I did my Figaro's, I did my Guglielmo, I did my Leporello.
So what would
obviously I'd like to do the Count and Giovanni. It'll never happen, of course not. I personally prefer an older Giovanni, like when Peter Savage did it. Because he never has a woman again.
Where was that?
Scottish Opera.
Okay.
So that was the last time I sang Mozart. That was 2006. Mozart year, that was the only, somehow I got that job, but I didn't have any other Mozart in Mozart anniversary year. And that's when I knew, having just done Johanna, yeah, now I need to change that line. It took 3 years before I was offered a role a year or so later after this competition, which was in 06, which I won. Of course, this Seattle competition, I'd never won anything before. I always done well, but never won anything. And that got me auditions wherever I wanted. So I got an audition at the Met, and they said, well, you'll never sing this repertoire in this house. You know.
Did they say why?
I don't know.
Okay.
Just, who knows?
They said the same to, apparently, to Fish D Scout.
Yeah, right, they were.
So, you know what?
Yeah. Well, what kind of career did he have, you know? That's fine. But then I when it came around to Berlin, to Staatsoper Berlin, the then casting director said, I'm starting to run my own house in Graz. I'm licensing as the first show. I want you to use Sachs.
Great.
And she twisted my arm and I said I was too young, and she said, no, you should do it. And of course, then everything changed. She's now the boss back in Berlin. So,
okay.
And fortunately, I'm going back there. So I don't know whether it's to do with her. But,
when is that?
Next season. So another Hollander. So I got lots of Hollanders next season.
So you say...
Oh, a couple more. Maybe give a couple more mentors. So Don McIntyre, I went and did a bit of work with on Sachs. I think he was a Wotan. He was very fine Sachs, but we didn't see it differently. I never really worked with John Tom because we come at it from totally different angles, particularly the Ring. He was this bass through sheer technique, willpower, strength, get it up there, whereas I'm a baritone that needs to keep it nice and low for Act 2 of Valkyrie, and this kind of thing. So it didn't make sense. And he's so cerebral, as you know. And sometimes I'm a little more, it sounds awful, a little more simplistic and just, but you know, he lived that role for however many years, and I'm doing other stuff as well.
His ability to get inside the text, I mean, more than anyone else I've ever met in coaching sessions, really took me by surprise.
But have you ever noticed how much he pulls it around, the music? It's not, I can't say it's not accurate, because it is, but Barenboim particularly would give him a lot of license.
That's true.
And he would pull everything around. And I wanted to talk to Anne Evans about it, because obviously she was singing opposite him a lot. Did that frustrate you, knowing that he would go, da, 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 da. I mean, I'm not saying it is totally inaccurate, because it wasn't, but he, over the years, developed so much freedom in what he was doing, because of the way he communicated, whereas Anne was beautiful, of course, but always, it seemed to me, precise, which is where I come from in the music. If that's what it says, of course I will use every colour that I've learnt in leader singing and this kind of thing if I possibly can, or if a conductor says, oh no, pull that out more. But, you know, the guy in Leipzig says, there is no recitative in Wagner, meaning, which is fine, that's him, he was a musicologist, so, you know, he obviously knew what he was talking about. But that's fascinating to hear how different people in the same venue sang and in the same show.
But both work. I mean, I think I had coaching with John before I had coaching with you, and you're right, you come at it from very different angles, but I learned so much from both of you, and actually taking that out of Wagner into other. So I did, after coachings with both of you, I then went on to do something very different. It was the Bluebeard's Castle, Bluebeard's Castle. But actually it needs a similar kind of voice. It has to have, it's a voice with quite a lot of weight in it. You can't sing it otherwise. And I found bringing what you had both taught me into that piece was really useful, because it meant you were never approaching it in one way.
No, I would hope that I've approached my Wagner learning with the same that I did when I was singing Schubert or whatever. It's one voice. It's what you choose to show and use, and obviously particularly language. Did you do it in Hungarian or in English?
In Hungarian. It's hard.
I mean, that's going to give it all sorts of different colours than if you're doing it in your own tongue.
It's a fantastic. I'm really glad we did it in Hungarian, not English, because it's, once you get to grips with it, it's an amazing language to sing. All the vowels, you get them right, and it just rings. And you think, I wish I could do this when I was singing English.
I've always been too scared. Not that I haven't really been. I've been asked to look at it once or twice, and I just
no, you should do it.
No, I've the same with anything in Czech as well. I did a tiny bit of Russian earlier in my career, and just now that there are so many singers from Eastern Europe who are fabulous, who are so much closer to those languages if it's not even their native. I mean, I've been to Hungary. There are some amazing Hungarian singers I've worked with. So you just kind of you do it, guys.
One of my favourite singers at the moment is a Polish guy, and I won't be able to pronounce his name, but you're on the same circuit singing the same role, so you probably know him. Is it Tomasz Koźniewski?
Yeah, Koźniewski. Funny enough, I don't know whether I should say this on camera. He's under the weather at the moment, and is singing Valkyrie tonight, so you almost didn't get me.
You nearly
5:30 yesterday evening.
Okay.
Don't suppose you're free to come to Bayreuth to do Valkyra?
I'm sorry, I can't. I've got an interview with you.
Basically, that's what I said. I did say I had a commitment, and the notion, it would have meant, I'd missed the last flight of the day, and I had to get up crack of dawn. Do I really want to go back to Bayreuth after 13 years into probably a fairly crazy production, I'm guessing, having seen pictures?
Okay.
To sing a role that I know they weren't interested in me at the moment anyway, because I was offered a while ago. Obviously, I'm with the same agency as Tomasz, so he's going through his list, knowing, because there aren't so many people who can sing Wotan.
Not on a day's notice.
No. I don't know whether I've sung it in concert, but I haven't done it on stage since before COVID.
Okay.
So it's probably there, but not fresh. Whereas last season I jumped in as Sachs in Berlin, on, and I had 2 days or 3 days notice, which gave me enough time to watch the video, once again, crazy production, have a couple of rehearsals, and then do it. But of course, the notion of Sachs is it has to be in the right part of the brain, because you can't be wanting to know what the next word is. So and then, because it's right in the right part of the brain, I could just bring it back up and then concentrate on the production and this kind of thing, because I know what I'm saying, know every word inside out. But whether I could do that on Wotan after 6 years, and I don't know. It's a hell of a thing to do. I mean, literally, it's a 4 o'clock in the afternoon performance.
So this is Valkyrie.
Valkyrie. So he did. There was Rheingold last night. Hopefully, he's well enough and he can sing it tonight. Now, once again, he's a totally different voice to me. He's a
bit like John, I find.
It's punchier. It's bigger. He was a fabulous Alberich and Tellermund and these kind of, what I call the more roles, but now seems to be doing a lot more Hollanders and Wotans and this kind of thing. And fair play, he's a good actor. He trained as an actor first, so
that's right.
But of course, it wasn't meant to be him originally. Someone else was supposed to do it, and they moved all the deck chairs in Bayreuth last summer or the summer before because there were so many. One of our finest album tenors died, so they had to move, everyone into the other parts. But even the baritones and basses were all changing as well. So yes, so I'm not in Bayreuth today.
No,
and I'm probably quite glad. I would love. The ironic thing is, I think I have 3 ambitions left. I'd love to sing Wotan in Bayreuth. I'd love to sing Arabella in Vienna. That would be brilliant. Mandrika is a wonderful role. And Sachs in Munich, because that's where I was asked to jump in for Sachs in Munich a few years ago, decided not to. Now I've been asked to do Wotan in Bayreuth, decided not to. And I'm thinking, all right, okay. So it's all very. It's the famous story of the guy on the top of his house and the flooding, and he's praying to God and says, "Send me, rescue me." And a guy comes along on a boat and says, "Do you want to come? You can come in the boat." No, God's going to rescue me. And there's all these people are sent to the rescue, and then of course he ends up drowning, goes up to speak to God, and he says, "Oh no, I sent you all these things to help you out." And oh right, okay, but you were going to. And so it's like, I've sent you Wotan, I've sent you Sachs.
Yeah.
Oh, right, okay. And I said, no, never mind.
On the topic of other roles, because I asked you if you were
offered
Mozart's, did you do, I saw your name down for something, which I wouldn't have expected. Was it Rocco?
Yeah.
Where was that?
Los Angeles Philharmonic.
Okay. So concert performance.
Yes and no. It was actually fully staged. What was most interesting about it was it's a collaboration with deaf actors and a deaf chorus. So a Venezuelan, because it's Dudamel conducting. So it's hard to describe a chorus that does sign language, but you can imagine it. And then each of the singers were doubled by an actor. So of course Fidelio has all this dialogue. So they signed the dialogue, and then also signed when we were singing, so it signed my aria, this kind of thing. And it's amazing. We did it in LA, and then we went to Barcelona and Paris and London, and it was fantastic. I mean, just, a wonderful job. Yes, it's normally done by a bass. Ironically, the Rocco is exactly the same tessiture as Hollander and Wotan.
Really?
Yeah, it's the same notes, not quite as high. And because there are 3 roles, for either bass or baritone. As it happened, the guy who comes in at the end, the Don Fernando, was a real fruity bass, so it balanced it out a bit. And if I looked at that piece, Rocco's the one I would choose. He's most like Sachs, he's most, he's the mensch, he's the guy, and he sings the longest. A lot of basses actually struggle to sing for a long time because they're not used to it, and he sings the whole night. What's the name of that? The main Pizarro is the baddie. He only has an aria duet and not much else. And it's not a great role.
It's quite shouty.
Yeah, it is, and I don't do that. And Beethoven famously didn't write particularly well for the voice. This was more about the project, because of the link with Beethoven's deafness and this kind of thing. And so when we did it in the Barbican, and you know that a third of the audience were deaf, and of course they never go into a concert hall, deaf people. Why would you? You can't hear. So suddenly there's a whole group of people that have never been in a building. I would hope that people then said, "Oh, we'll put on things for you."
Amazing.
Obviously, sometimes there's someone signing in the corner or something, but it's difficult. But once again, that, of course, not a role you'd think I would do, because it's normally a bass. It was half necessity and half interest. You know, I didn't have so much work last season.
Mm-hmm.
That was a really fantastic job that paid well, and I knew I could sing it, and I didn't balls it up. So, and hopefully just about, you know.
I'm sure it was better than.
No, that's the threshold. You know that. Don't balls it up. And I went to nice places, but then just before that, I had virtually nothing. So it's, you know, that's just how the diary worked. And that next season is really good. So
fantastic. So the reason why I was surprised when you said I've actually not had a very good year is because when we were conversing by email recently, you said, "Oh, you know, got some good things lined up," and I, in my head, got the dates wrong. I thought that had just happened rather than it was about to happen.
Yeah. No,
so what have you got next year then?
So what I had that back then was I went to Calgary in Canada, which is a very small company. They do 3 operas a year. They needed a Wotan, and the conductor happened to be with the agency that I was with, and so I ended up, because normally the irony is there I am singing Wotan in Canada, and then the Wotan at E&O is a Canadian. And it's just kind of, you know, this nonsense situation we have.
Who is that?
John Rowley. Fantastic singer, wonderful singer. But yeah, just the fact that a British guy who sings Wotan has to sing it in Canada, and the Canada guy sings it in London. You know, it's I love on the social media thing when things pop up of old cast lists, even at Covent Garden. It was like an Onegin popped up the other day, entirely British or British trained cast at Covent Garden. You know, I think it probably was Ben Luxon who just died a couple of days ago.
Did he?
He was a mentor of mine, by the way.
Really?
Yeah, no, he just passed away.
That's sad.
But yeah, sorry to let you know that. He was my mentor for British Youth Opera when I did Full Staff.
Okay.
And delightful. And this National Youth Music Theatre thing I did as a 16-year-old, when we did it for TV, he did the role that I did.
Right.
So we chatted, and I've got family ancestry from Cornwall, and I can't say like so he didn't speak like that, but he was so generous and so kind. And I remember he came to the first night of the Full Star, gave me a big hug, and you know, almost teared up, and just, you know, delightful man.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's
it's amazing how many people don't know about him. I mean, an amazing singer.
Yeah. Listen to his song recording.
Yes.
English song, definitive English song recordings.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he could sing anything as well.
His Onegin was very big.
Yeah. Where was I before
that? What have you got coming up?
Oh yeah. Not much variety of music at the moment. So I've got a couple of Traviatas. Then about 4 back-to-back Fliegende Hollanders.
Okay.
In nice places, all in German-speaking countries. Brexit has massively shot me in every limb.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been going to embassies and begging and praying that I can go. I know I will lose lots in tax as a result, but at the moment I'm allowed to do the German jobs. I've got permission. I have a visa to do that, which of course 3 years ago I could just get on a plane and work. So thanks, boomers. Sorry, no, I shouldn't say that.
Not a political channel.
No, we're not political.
A political channel.
No. But it has. I mean, the reality is that Brexit has not fully stuffed, but half stuffed the international possibilities for opera singers. And I'm well established. So if I was 20 years younger, it would be a nightmare. Of course, then you would have to get a fest and a residency over there and that kind of thing.
It's madness to do something like that without actually putting.
Well, who knows? Maybe
plan.
our Guildhall trained Prime Minister will realise that the arts are important.
Well, I mean, he said that, you know, they want close relations, rejoin the what's it called?
Not the single market.
Not the single market, the other one. And but in his lifetime, we will not be part of the European Union, which I think he may go back on in a few years. I think.
I'm not so worried about being in the EU. Just some reciprocal arrangements for freedom of movement for professionals, which is what we are. Dear Boris thought it was about, you know, people coming over and playing panpipes on Oxford Street. And that's what he thought of musicians, and so therefore we're not talking, no, it's the London Symphony Orchestra going to Berlin and the Berlin Philharmonic coming to London.
Yeah.
That's what it's about.
International relations.
Yeah, and I believe they made exceptions for lawyers and doctors and, you know, what they consider professions, hedge fund managers probably, because they're important. But it's, you know, the cultural thing has to change, that landscape.
I think
it's nonsense.
That government and the two after, the very short-lived Truss government and the Sunak government, seem to have absolutely no respect for arts and culture whatsoever. It just wasn't on their radar. They seemed to scoff at it, completely like belittle it.
And the irony of all that education, that very
Exactly.
expensive education, and then they ridicule our deputy prime minister who left school at 16 and had a kid and this kind of thing for going to Glyndebourne. Because she said, well, actually, no, I really like the music.
Yeah.
And they ridiculed her. These kids that went to these, you know, we both went to private schools, but it's, yeah. I shouldn't say anymore.
Well, we've covered that.
Yes, quite.
Yeah. I think I'm done with all my questions. It's very nice to see you again.
Cool.
And I hope your son has a nice interview.
Yes.
And yeah, come down to London more. Give me more coaching when we both have time.
Yeah, no, I must.
And that's something.
That's the problem. Next season looking good means that I'm
You're
not
not
around.
No.
I'm around even less. Although to be fair, I've just done 3 back-to-back jobs in North America, so that is less convenient. But I do pop back between shows in Germany and Austria. So
okay, cool. Yeah. On the teaching front, is that something you want to do more of in the future?
I had a long conversation about this a couple of weeks ago with a colleague. I never thought I would. I always thought I would just sing. And actually, of my generation, particularly from college, I'm one of the few that you would say I left college and I've only ever earned a living singing since then. Even during COVID, I just didn't work, you know. I've enjoyed doing what I call the slight mentoring, the slight interpretation of, you know, just literally opening Wagner to guys like yourself and these other guys I've met through the Wagner Society and master singers. It sounds patronising, doesn't it, sharing tips, but there are things that I have learned that clearly are not taught in a collegiate level or whatever. Even just, I remember another, almost a semi-mentor was this David Cyrus. He used to be the head of music at Royal Opera House for years and years. And he conducted our shows in National Youth Music Theatre. So I knew him from the age of 15. Then the day I auditioned for the National Opera Studio there, he is sat on the panel and he offers me the Royal Opera House scholarship. And you know, so that kind of came full circle. And then he was one of the coaches that the Master Singers and Wagner Society did. And I took bits of Wagner to him, and I learned more in those sort of 2 hours than I did in 20 hours with somebody else. Just how to sing on the voiced consonants in German. It's crucial, you know, and he famously sang Siegfried on the side of stage when someone went sick, when Schulte was conducting it in Bayreuth in the 80s. Now David has possibly the worst voice you will ever hear. And yet Schulte wanted him to sing Siegfried rather than an understudy or this kind of thing, because he knew that David would know it.
Right.
So there's all those famous stories about him, but he was wonderful. And so, yeah, those kind of things. Philip Langridge, I worked with, I did The Ring. It was Bryn Tervel's first Wotan at Covent Garden. Philip was Loga, I was just doing Donna. So that was another sponge thing, learn from all those experiences. And I watched Philip, who'd done Loga quite a few times, Keith Warner production, and from day one he was just like a small child, just absorbing, building his role over the month or so of rehearsals. And of course, come first night, yeah, Bryn's a huge star, and I adore him, and I have all his music, and I know him, and blah, blah, blah. Philip stole the show. Just as because of course it's a gift of a role. But he was special, there's something special about him, and of course, bless him, he was dead within 5 or 6 years. But so I learned so much, and I remember sitting in the canteen once, and the previous job I'd done was with a national company here, and in the first week, the revival director wanted to sack me, because he said I didn't move correctly for the role, I didn't understand the physicality of, because he was a choreographer, of course, he became a director. physicality. Unfortunately, the opera company said, no, just bear with him. He's good. I was 30 years old. He's good. Well, you should do that. It was Janacek, Makeras conducting. So, if you're going to do Janacek, Makeras. And of course, by the time we opened, I'd used the rehearsal period and I did all right. I got nice reviews, etc. And I recounted this story to Philip. And he said, well, what's rehearsal for? If it's not to make mistakes and to learn and to do all this kind of thing. And when you speak to guys like that and just absorb the knowledge that they have, and that was always my thing. Don't, not great intellect from my point of view, just learn from the people around you. And I still am, there are still some great artists out there and you do learn. And the depressing thing is now they're getting younger and I'm going to have to learn off them.
One of my questions, and I usually put this at the end, is if there was something that you would like to, I think you've just answered it, if there was something you wanted to pass on to younger or less experienced singers, something that you've learnt and you think it's vital, would that be it? Is always watch and just
that's one thing.
Absorb everything.
Flipping hard work. It's hard. I remember I came down to college having done music college, having done university, and my now wife, who there was then my fiance, she was working, so I treated it like a job. I spent all day in college. When I wasn't doing sessions, I was in the library, listening, learning, trying to do everything. And the guys are all up in the bar drinking and having fun, because not a problem with that. They don't have careers, of course, because it was just something they did. Okay, some do, of course. There's going to be a brass player or two that got through it, but you know what I mean. Just that the singers, there's hardly anyone I was at music college with who earns a living as a singer, just as a singer. I know dear friends who sing and teach and do, the typical British thing, string to as many strings to your bow as you can. I've only ever done the singing thing, which is why I immediately knew I had to go abroad, because that's where the work is, and I couldn't sustain a living in this country. Particularly if they're not interested. I mean, if they're not interested, then you have to go, don't you? So flipping hard work, there is this thing I've come across, particularly in the young artists I've met in America, where they have these wonderful young artist programs. They've never listened to a CD or even Spotify of a Wagner opera, and there they are singing a small role in a Wagner opera because they're a young artist and they're free. And they've never listened to Wagner, and you think, mate, just, do you speak German? No. Fine, okay, go and listen to someone singing it in German, your role, so you know how to use the language. And as I said, we have this 100 years of recordings. Why would you ignore that? Use your voice, but listen to everyone else. There was a third thing, but I can't remember. It's something profound, I'm sure.
I had another question, and I also can't remember.
Yeah,
so we'll
that's all right. Yeah,
brilliant.
Cool.
Thank you very much, James. Pleasure to see you as always.
Yeah.
I'll switch off the camera now.
Yeah.
And thank you for watching, all the people who are going to watch this, and we'll see you at the next one.